It is officially over. The civil lawsuit that kicked off the past 6 weeks of Jake Retzlaff dominating headlines both locally and nationally, it's gone. Now both sides have to move forward.
You are Locked On Cougars, your daily podcast on the BYU Cougars. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everybody? Welcome into Locked On Cougars, your daily podcast focused on the BYU Cougars. I'm Jake Hatch, executive producer of the KSL Sports Zone and a 13-year credentialed media member at BYU. I am your resident expert and insider, your host here on this podcast. And as always, thank you for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. New customers get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Go to the FanDuel.com or open the FanDuel app and get started today. Coming up on today's show, we talk about the latest twists and turns with regards to the Jake Retzlaff saga. Obviously, biggest news of the day yesterday is that the civil lawsuit that kicked off the past 6 weeks has officially been dismissed with prejudice. We'll explain exactly what that means and what it means going forward for both BYU football and Jake himself. Then we're going to talk about a new addition to the BYU football class of 2026. That is Letti Moala. What is the Orem High School product bringing to BYU? We'll delve into that. And we'll finish up today's show because today we officially enter a brand new era. Welcome to the house era. What does that mean? We'll explain a little later on. All right, without further ado, let's talk about the latest twists and turns with regards to Jake Retzlaff. Now, if you missed this yesterday, there was a joint motion filed by both the attorneys for the alleged victim in the civil lawsuits alleging sexual assault against Jake Retzlaff, along with Jake's own attorneys. They filed a motion to have the case dismissed. Now, it was dismissed without prejudice and based on merits, and that means that it cannot be refiled, resurrected. It simply put, it cannot be brought again into a court of law because when you dismiss it with prejudice, that means it's dead and gone. Now, obviously, it was a key cog in Jake Retzlaff's hopes of moving on from BYU, moving on from this entire saga, because it's been 6 weeks of nonstop what's happening now with Jake Retzlaff. When is he going to speak? And when are we going to hear something from somebody with regards to this? It was a full month and a half, and I'm sure that he and his legal team are happy to have it behind him, and I'm sure the alleged victim also, likewise, is ready to move on. But the bigger point to be made here is now both BYU and Jake both have to find a way to move forward without each other. Jake Retzlaff still fully intends to leave BYU and transfer, and I'm hearing more and more that Notre Dame, the Golden Domers, the Fighting Irish, they are the odds-on favorite to land Jake Retzlaff to come in for his one season of eligibility. And I'll reiterate this here. Based on the rules that I read, I understood that Jake Retzlaff, even though he was a graduate transfer, is going to be beholden to the transfer portal window and the cycles thereof. But multiple people, we're talking high-level individuals who have far more knowledge of this situation, believe that Jake Retzlaff will petition for immediate eligibility wherever he lands, if it is with Notre Dame or elsewhere, and is expected to receive that. Now, he will move forward, obviously, with his playing career, and you wish him nothing but the best. But the BYU football program also has to be able to move forward here. And I believe that BYU will do their best to move forward, but also not lose any momentum they built up over the past season. Yes, losing your starting quarterback, that obviously hurts. And Jake, in his own right, with a pending civil lawsuit, there was simply no way that any university, Notre Dame or otherwise, was going to be willing to touch him or at least bring him in with a pending civil lawsuit alleging sexual assault, among other things, right there. That's PR 101. You do not touch that with the proverbial 10-foot pole. Well, now that it's resolved, it's much more tenable for a program like a Notre Dame or anybody else to say, okay, Jake, here you go. We're going to sign you to an NIL deal, grant an aid, and you're going to be our quarterback, at least part of the quarterback solution for our football program. Is it disappointing to have 6 weeks of entire world for Jake Retzlaff and the BYU football program upended when it felt like things were going to be sailing into what was expected to be a pretty high-level season for the BYU football program? Yeah, I think there's a sense of disappointment there. But as I mentioned, both sides, now they got to move forward. They have to coalesce around each other. Speaking of the other members of the BYU football program, I know that Kalani Sitake and his coaches will make it very clear to the players in the program that there is no time to rest. There's no time to waste. They have to continue to get ready. We have 5 members of the BYU football program who will be heading to Big 12 Media Days. We found that out just yesterday. They are LJ Martin, Chase Roberts, Keanu Tanuvasa, Isaiah Glasker, and Jack Kelly. I think those 5 are very deserving to be representing BYU at that level in terms of speaking to the national media, other media members from around the Big 12 conference, and essentially espouse what BYU is all about. Yes, they're going to face the inevitable questions about, hey, how do you guys move forward with Jake Retzlaff no longer a part of the program? And obviously there's going to be questions of, hey, can you guys pick up the pieces and will you guys be able to recover from losing your starting quarterback? That's all questions they are going to face. But I believe those 5 players outside of a Jake Retzlaff are the most deserving and also will be guys who will be able to handle, I think, any and every curveball that can be thrown their way when it comes to the questions they will face at Big 12 Media Days. Kalani Sitake and the BYU Sports Information Department, I'm sure, will coach them up on how to address things. I do wonder, I guess this is the one thing I'm interested in, is that BYU so far has not made any comment, even with the dismissal of the civil lawsuit. Reached out and asked about that, and there was no word back immediately on if they were going to make a statement. Will they continue to refer back to the initial statement they made, or will there be a new statement, whether it's Kalani Sitake finally addressing things more in full now that the civil lawsuit is in the rearview mirror? That's one question that is a major question that remains to be answered. But the simple fact of life is Jake Retzlaff, with that civil lawsuit finally resolved, and I know that it being dismissed with prejudice, there's been a little bit of a quibble back and forth on social media, maybe more than a quibble, more of a brouhaha amongst opposing fan bases and BYU fans as to if there was a settlement agreed to have this case dismissed. Very well could be the case. Very well could have just been on merit alone. They decided to dismiss the case. Doesn't matter to me. It's in the rearview mirror, and nobody, I don't think, outside of the people involved, whether that's the lawyers, maybe some high-level individuals at BYU, but obviously Jake Retzlaff and the alleged victim, AG, as they listed this Jane Doe in the lawsuit. They will really only ever be the ones that know exactly what went into resolving this case, but the simple fact of the matter is there is no time to waste for the BYU football program. They have to have a forward focus. There's no looking back. It's the whole adage of burn the ships. We're only going forward. Yes, losing Jake Retzlaff and seeing him wander off on a different path can be difficult, I'm sure, for many guys in the BYU football program, but they have to pick up the pieces now, move forward, and coalesce around one another and go after it this year, because I think there is still a whole lot to play for if you're the BYU football program. And I think Kalani Sitake and his team are very intent on showing that they are more than just one quarterback in terms of their ability to compete and compete favorably in the Big 12. All right, coming up next, BYU continues to do work in the recruiting cycle. They're absolutely dominating the in-state recruiting in the 2026 recruiting class, and they added yet another piece to the puzzle. That is Letti Moala. Who is he, and what is he going to bring to BYU? We'll get into that next, right here on Locked On Cougars. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Now, obviously, the summer is a crazy time with other sports going on, whether you're about baseball under the lights, you're a soccer fanatic, or you just simply like golf. That FanDuel is the best way to make every game more exciting, and you're already following all the action. If you're watching any one of these sports or any other one, why not make it a little more thrilling and do it with our friends over at FanDuel? You can get in on the game while your friends are getting sunburned at the beach. It's a great trade-off, I think, under the circumstances. Easy to use, fast to pay out, makes even regular season games feel like must-watch events. And like I said, it's every sport under the sun. Whether you're looking at futures odds for BYU football in the aftermath of the Jake Retzlaff situation, over under win totals and the like, FanDuel's got that for you guys, along with the live game action right now. So if you're new to FanDuel, new customers get bet just $5 to get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. As simple as that. So open the FanDuel app today or visit FanDuel.com to get started. Once again, $150 if your first $5 bet wins. Take advantage of it today via the FanDuel app or FanDuel.com. Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. As always, thank you for all y'all support. By the way, this is a new hat I'm wearing here. Maybe a little shout out to the guys at the Game Day Hue. They are big Cougar fans, and they're not sponsoring the show at the current time, so this is not a paid advertisement. They sent me some swag, and obviously this is a pretty cool royal blue BYU hat, and a big ups to the Game Day Hue guys for sending it over. They also have team gear and color schemes for every team under the sun. If you have a team that you want to support and you like kind of I guess it's not an outlandish, it's kind of a subdued, it's just the colors about your team. Well, check out Game Day Hue. They're really, really cool stuff, and appreciate them sending over some swag so I could test it out. I figured I'd wear it on the podcast today. All right, so let's talk about a new addition to the 2026 recruiting cycle for the BYU football program, and that is Letti Moala. Now, as we talk about this, I'm going to throw this up here. His highlight reel lets you guys kind of get a full sense for who he is as a football player, because I really do think that he has got the capability of being a nice piece for the BYU football program. We'll push play here and let you see what it is. Now, these highlights are from his time at Davis High School. He's been playing at Davis for the past 3 years. He is now transferred to Orem High School, just a stone's throw away from BYU, where he figures to bring his incredible pass rush ability and overall athleticism on the defensive line to the BYU football program. You'll see him lining up here on the edge a lot for Davis High School, and he's an absolute terror off the edge. He is a guy that is just, he's absolutely intent on making disruptive plays against opposing quarterbacks. And that's what I love about him. But I am of the opinion that he will take that athleticism off the edge. He's already listed at 6'3", 240 or 250 pounds. I think in time, BYU plans on maybe bulking him up and moving him inside, where he can play maybe a 5 or a 3 technique and use that athleticism he shows as a pass rusher on the defensive line at defensive tackle. I love the way he plays the game. There is a nonstop motor. He's been very productive at Davis High School, and I think he's ready to take it to another level this year for Orem High School. And I think it's a really, really nice addition for BYU, especially along their defensive line. Jay Hill, Sione Puha, Kelly Papinga, Chad Kaha'a, as well as Gary Anderson are kind of the 5 guys who have been intent on upgrading BYU's defensive line play. Well, having high-level players like Letti Moala are a big key in doing that. Now, the biggest thing for Letti Moala is he is another 3-star prospect, but he's not your average 3-star prospect that BYU recruited during their independent era. He's a high-level 3-star prospect. The overall rating on him says that he is one of the guys that isn't necessarily a top shelf prospect, because BYU has the Ryder Lyons, the Brock Harrises of the world, but you need pieces like Letti Moala, because I see a ton of potential in what BYU sees in him in terms of his ability to come in and contribute right away for the BYU football program. And that should be an enticing proposition, because even if he doesn't bulk up, if he plays still at the 6'3", 240, maybe 250, maybe even as much as 260 pounds, he can be a very effective defensive end in and of itself, even if he doesn't put on the adequate weight to move to the interior of BYU's defensive line. But I think this skill set alone screams high-level contributor for BYU, and yet another piece to the puzzle in terms of unlocking BYU's defensive line play for years to come. I expect this year the BYU's defensive line is going to take another step forward. They did some really, really nice things last year with John Nelson, as well as guys along that defensive line, like Tyler Batty, But I think Keanu Tanavasa, a guy like Justin Kirkland, Alvin Puafua, the guys they brought on the interior of the defensive line, and the young defensive ends on the exterior, guys like Hunter Clegg, Tausili Akana, they're expected to take another step forward. And if BYU starts to really get more production from their defensive line play, they are only going to make themselves that much better as a team. And the biggest thing is Jay Hill, the way that he coordinates his defense, I love the way that he goes about things. And I think that so long as he continues to recruit at a high level on this defensive line, and that goes to what a guy like Letti Moala brings to the table here for BYU, I think at some point you're going to find one of those guys who's going to erupt and be an absolute sensation, be that star pass rusher that BYU's seemingly needed for a decade now under Kalani Sitake. The one thing that's remaining in terms of the calculus in Jay Hill's defense is an elite pass rush. He's got elite linebacker play. He's got corners who are very capable in coverage. He's got safeties who come downhill and are very capable in covering their own right. The biggest thing he needs now is a defensive line that with a 4-man front can A, hold up against the run, but B, more importantly, get after the quarterback, strip sacks, making quarterbacks jumpy, making them have happy feet, see ghosts, as they like to say out there. And so long as BYU gets that, and whether it's a Letti Moala down the line or somebody from this year's squad, BYU's defense will be that much more dangerous. And consider how dangerous it was a season ago. Jay Hill had that defense absolutely balling all season long. And it feels like if they can get the answers on the defensive line to have two stud defensive ends along with two mauling defensive tackles, man, the sky's the limit. I think Letti Moala is a really, really sure bet to be a part of that rotation at bare minimum. I see potential in Letti Moala. You probably saw it in his highlight reel if you're watching this on YouTube, that he's got a motor, he's got skills, pass rush ability, and the best part is he's got athleticism. A lot of guys will specialize in just one sport, speaking of football or otherwise. But what I like about a guy like Letti Moala, and we'll see if he does it at Orem, but he played basketball for Davis High School. And it wasn't that he was on the basketball team just to be there. He was a high-level contributor for that basketball team. That shows that he's got really nimble footwork. He understands spacing. He understands how to play one-on-one. The basketball element, the multi-sport element for a lot of athletes, it gets overlooked in this. But I know that BYU values, speaking of the coaching staff, they value guys who don't just put all their eggs in one basket and hope that's enough. They like guys who will spend time playing baseball or doing track and field, or in this case, like Moala, playing basketball. That extra athleticism you show and the ability to move across different sports, it shows that you are more of an athlete than you are just a robot who can do one thing on the football field. It shows that you are a true athlete. And I think that BYU, if you look kind of their history, almost every guy that they have recruited usually plays a different sport outside of football. McKay Madsen is just an absolute freak. We talked about him. We've had him on this podcast. He's a 4-star prospect from last year's recruiting cycle. He just set the CIF record for both discus and shot put, and he's going to play either running back or linebacker at BYU. We've got guys who are running sprints. In the case of the McKenzie brothers who are currently at BYU, them, Parker Kingston, Cody Hagan, they were all kind of in that same recruiting class, and they were all racing each other in the 100 meters at the state track meet. BYU values multi-sport athletes, and I think Letti Moala is just the latest example of that. And I'm looking forward to seeing what he brings to BYU whenever he enrolls. I don't know. I probably should have checked this out before I recorded, but I was not able to get a firm answer on it as to if he has mission plans and if he, not if, but when he plans to embark on his mission. But just watching the highlight reel and knowing how good Orem is going to be this coming season, because sure looks like Orem's going to be elite. They've got guys like Kawe Akana, Taden Kawa at quarterback. That Orem squad, and hey, many of you know them in Mountain View Bruin, but I can admit that my crosstown rival Orem, they're absolutely locked and loaded. And Letti Moala, he is just another incredible piece to Orem's. Obviously, calculus coming in this upcoming senior season for him, but more importantly, down the line for BYU, I'm excited to see him achieve his potential and see what he's capable of accomplishing as a BYU Cougar. All right, coming up next, we are entering a whole new era. Today is the day. The House settlement, you probably heard about this literally for years at this point, but today, July 1st, is officially the beginning of the House settlement era. What does it entail for BYU? What does it mean for BYU's athletes? And by extension, what does it mean for everybody in college football? Well, we are going to delve into that next as we continue on right here on Locked On Cougars. Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. Appreciate all of you who are already members of the Locked On Cougars Insider Group. If you want the inside scoop on all things BYU that I am hearing, join the Locked On Cougars Insider Group today. The link is in the show notes below, or reach out to us via social media. We'll get you squared away. The best part is you get 2 weeks of a free trial before you're charged a single penny, and it's just $5 a month to be a part of the Locked On Cougars Insider Group. So hope that many more of you be joining the hundreds we already have in the group, and do it in short order ahead of the start of this football season. All right. Welcome to the House settlement era, everybody. July 1st, we've been waiting on this for months, if not years now, for the House settlement to come into effect. Now, some of you have asked, well, Jake, what is the House settlement? Because I've talked about it on and off on this podcast and how it's going to affect BYU and how it's going to affect the Big 12 and college football as a whole. What it is, just in a nutshell, it is a settlement of 3 antitrust cases that were levied against the NCAA, and it settles those by giving back pay of up to $2.8 billion to eligible Division I athletes who competed between 2016 and 2024 and were denied the opportunity to make NIL during their playing careers at whatever university and in whatever sport. Now, the payouts for those will range depending on what your status was as an athlete, what sport you played, and the like. But more importantly, in this day and age for college football, it changes everything. Many of you know that there is going to be a revenue share today that officially goes into effect. For the first time ever, schools, BYU among them, are now eligible and able legally to pay their athletes. There is a cap of $20.5 million that you can share with your athletes. And the expectation is that at least 70, if not 80 or more percent of that revenue share money will be going to the football programs. You break it down this way, the BYU, they are going to have 100-ish guys on their roster. The other thing about this is it installs no longer scholarship limits, but just simply roster limits. You can fully fund as many scholarships as you want across any sport, but you obviously have to do that as an individual university. Football is having a cut down over time because they've grandfathered in any player who is beyond what they have installed as a 105-man roster limit for FBS Division I football. But BYU's players, whether they have 105, 110, 115, or 123, which was the old number, that was the max player number of players you could have, BYU now has contracts that are now enforceable with their athletes that guarantee them a set amount of money. Now, I don't know, I'm not privy to the information as to how much money is going each which way to which player on BYU's roster, but I understand from what I've heard from people inside the BYU football program, and BYU's not alone in this, is that the way they're approaching this house settlement era is that whether they have, let's say you have $20 million and you pay 80% of it to the football program, that's, let's say, easy math, $16 million. That's what you have to delineate across your entire football roster. Well, as you all know, with the NFL, some positions are worth more than others. Quarterbacks, obviously, worth more. Left tackles, worth more. Defensive ends, star linebackers. There are priority positions. There's other positions that don't take as much priority and therefore don't make as much money. BYU has had negotiations via Dave George, who's their new GM, and the players, they have sat down, they've hammered out an agreement, and today, for the first time ever, it is enforceable, and BYU players will be getting payments via this revenue share that comes directly from Brigham Young University to themselves. Previously, they got scholarship checks, they got Alston money, they were getting NIL checks, they were getting money from the collectives and the like, but now BYU is officially in the business of paying its own athletes, and they are one of just hundreds of football programs across the country. There will also be between 15 and 20% going to Division I men's basketball programs. So there will be a smaller amount of money going to BYU basketball. But the other thing about BYU basketball is that Kevin Young and the NIL prowess that BYU brought to bear with this past recruiting cycle, I don't think they're going to have to spend as much money as they probably planned on. And they may be able to bank some of this money away for next year's recruiting class. And maybe that could entice a few guys to come BYU's way if they can get a little extra cheddar, as it were, via that revenue share. Now, that remains to be determined. We'll see what happens in the upcoming recruiting cycle for men's basketball. But really, the rest of the athletes at BYU and other universities, there's going to be between 5 and 10% of that money, speaking of the revenue share, that's going to go to the rest of the athletes. Some schools will prioritize a different sport that maybe makes revenue, because revenue means that you bring money into the university. And really, the two that make the most money and really make the only money at most universities, and BYU's right among them, are football and men's basketball. Now, could you find a one-off, like maybe BYU women's soccer is close to being a revenue generator? Well, that would necessitate maybe some extra money going their way, but it's a small part of the pie that goes to those other athletes, but there will be some money going their way as well. Other things that go into effect today include the new enforcement entity. It's called the College Sports Commission. Now, it's essentially supposed to replace the NCAA and be able to enforce the rules of the house settlement era. Do I believe it's actually going to enforce those? And do I believe that they are truly enforceable? I've got my questions about that, because let's be honest. This is a sport, speaking of college football in particular, that has been rife with grifting, with cheating, with money being spent under the table to entice athletes to go to various universities, literally since the early days of this sport that goes back over 150 years. It has been part of the fabric of college football. Do I really believe that it's going to be all above board with everybody? No, I do not. But this College Sports Commission is supposed to have an enforcement arm that is capable of punishing schools to keep them in line. We'll see if it's able to pull that off. The other thing is now that they also have NIL deals. Anything over $600, and don't ask me why it is a $600 threshold. Any NIL deal that's worth that or more now has to go through a clearinghouse run by Deloitte Consulting, which is called NIL Go. So, for example, many of you know that on this podcast, I have had football players be a special guest. I have paid them for their appearances. Connor Pay the last 2 years, Clark Barrington before that, and we're currently looking at all options in terms of next year. Well, I can tell you this much. With all the appearances that Connor Pay made this past year, his NIL deal was well over $600 and would have been vetted by this Deloitte Consulting. Now, as I understand it, they say that most true NIL deals, they said 80 or 90% of those would be approved under the current parameters that Deloitte Consulting plans on working with. They say that somewhere between 80 and 90% of old revenue deals, or whatever you term the collective deals that athletes were signing before this, those would have been nixed under this new consulting arm that's going to run things. Yesterday, Open Doors, which is one of the chief platforms for NIL money to be transferred to athletes via collectives and the like, said they set a single-day record for their company with $20 million being spread around to athletes. What that means is, literally up until midnight on June 30th, right before July 1 hits, there were deals being signed that include potentially multi-million-dollar deals that are going to be paid out to these athletes because they are not subject to NIL Go unless they were agreed to beginning today. I can imagine that there are BYU athletes that are very happy to have the deals that they have, and now that they're not subject to that NIL Go, they can collect that check and move forward. But this new era, it's going to necessitate that you have to be much more on the up and up in terms of checking all the boxes when it comes to true NIL. And BYU fully intends to comply with this. We all know that BYU, they are rule followers, and for good reason. That's just the way that BYU operates. You may want to argue with it and say, hey, you should break the rules a little bit, BYU. That's not BYU style. We all know that. We just saw that with Jake Retzlaff. They upheld their standard with regards to the honor code. We have seen for years accusations of other universities that competed with BYU in the recruiting sphere before NIL was a thing and above board, that bagmen and the like existed in the sport and maybe siphoned off some talent that BYU would have liked to have had otherwise. Well, with these new rules, expect BYU to play by said rules, and they're going to have to hope to high heavens that everybody else plays by those rules. The good news is the athletes win in this. $20.5 million is an incredible amount of money. I can think of walk-ons with the BYU football program. One guy that I absolutely love his story just because I think it's incredible that where he's come from. Tanner Wall. Tanner was a guy, remember, he came out of the Washington, D.C. area, was an all-conference player, really fine player in his high school days, but didn't, as I understand it, get a ton of recruiting attention, especially from his dream school, that being BYU. Well, he decided to walk on to BYU after his mission and start out as a wide receiver. Didn't see much action at all in Fesi Sitake's room. And then Ed Lamb, crazily enough, when he was coaching BYU safety, said, hey, Tanner, flip over to defense. Let's see what you got. And from there, Tanner's had a meteoric rise. But at no point, as far as I'm aware, Tanner has ever been on scholarship. He has been paying his own way. Now, he has probably likely got some NIL money that has been able to help defray the costs of paying for school and training. And I know that he's married and the like, but it's not an easy life as a walk-on to be doing what Tanner Wall has done. But he has turned himself into what I think is a potential all-conference player coming up this upcoming season. Tanner is that good of a football player. And to have a contract now in effect that could pay him, let's say, potentially $100,000 or hundreds of thousands of dollars, that's life-changing money for a guy like that. Now, there are other guys in the BYU football program who already had NIL deals. They're paying them that or more money. But I think that walk-ons in particular are going to benefit from this to a larger level than I think any of us might realize. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but I just look at like a story of a Tanner Wall where he made a position switch and has emerged as a starting caliber Big 12 safety that I think is poised to have a monster senior season. Man, to have this type of money coming his way, what do you think he could do with that had he had this for 3 or 4 years? Who knows? But I really do like the fact that the athletes, they do win in this because it's more money coming their way because let's be honest, this is a multi-billion-dollar business that's been built literally on their backs. All right, that is going to do it for today's edition of the podcast. And once again, welcome to the House era. It's a crazy new world out there. And hey, we'll see what happens as we move forward into this new era. But as always, thank you for making Locked On Cougars your first listen today. And once again, as always, thank you for being an everydayer right here on the Locked On Cougars podcast.